Michael Mike Russell joins me here today. You can find what he is up to by heading over to hopeforhardship.org. You'll need to use the number 4 in that URL. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes, make it a lot easier. But we are going to be talking about helping people who are on the brink of foreclosure. So really appreciate your time today, Mike.
Absolutely. Grateful to be here, man. Good to meet you.
Well, I got to start things off by asking about how you found your way into this. Like I mentioned before we hit record, most people are trying to help themselves when they notice a pre-foreclosure,
Yeah,
not actually helping the person that's there.
sure. There's no question about that, right? So I've been in the real estate business my whole life. Since I was 19 years old, my father bought a Century 21 franchise. I didn't really have much plan in my life track. I wasn't thinking real estate, not even close. So I took the path of least resistance, of course. I went to see my old man and said, what do I have to do to turn my blue collar in to get a white collar? And he said, go to college. And so I reluctantly did that. I kind of held every position there is to hold in a real estate company over the course of my life, the last 30 years or so. I ran into some significant financial crisis in 2008, 2009, as so many people did. I couldn't really see the forest through the trees. I had every opportunity to capitalize on that market downturn. Now, I was surrounded by people who could have helped me do that, but I didn't really make many great life choices. I was an immature spending at best, and my spending was excessive. I mistook cash flow for wealth without really giving much consideration to the fact that cash flow can stop, certainly in a real estate organization during a time like 2008, 2009, into 2013. I made a whole bunch of bad decisions leading up to that. And then I made even worse decisions once the financial crisis came. I ended up allowing foreclosure to happen. I ended up divorced. I ended up having a short sale, some commercial buildings. I ended up filing corporate and personal bankruptcy. And that was bad enough, but it wasn't. It was the collateral damage that I created in my family that took me the better part of 10 years to remedy and try to cure. I riddled and saddled my family with a whole bunch of things, attachments on their property for decisions I made and things like that. It took me about 10 years to turn my life around and sort of figure things out, grow up. During that time, as I was addressing the collateral damage that I had created, I decided that, what to do with this 25, 30 years of useless real estate information is to pay it forward to other people and try to help them find a softer landing space than I did and help them make better choices than I did when financial crisis came up. And that's kind of where Hope for Hardship was born. I help people request and apply for assistance with their lenders when they are facing foreclosure. I'm a proponent of 2% mortgages, which there are quite a few of them out there today. And I work very hard. I spend most of my time trying to help people get out of their own way and recognize the value of having a long-term fixed low interest mortgage rate and, and how willing their own lender is to assist them in retaining that note, not modifying the note, but actually keeping those terms intact and staying in their home. Because, as of course, the cost of replacement housing will be quadruple what your mortgage. There's so many people sitting in a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath home at 2.45%, 2.65%, 27 years left remaining, paying $1,800 a month for mortgage, taxes, and insurance. And if they have to change their housing because they didn't make the right efforts to be proactive in attaining assistance, they'll be looking at a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment for $1,800. And that is a tremendously humbling scenario. That certainly did with me. Crisis in life and then tack on financial crisis. If you make really poor decisions, uninformed decisions when you're facing financial crisis, it has a way of elongating your general life crisis. Because I can tell you, some of the worst years of my life were the ones immediately preceding bankruptcy and foreclosure. those public events on my credit report made me unbankable in the traditional world of lending and really just gave me all the excuses I needed to continue the other poor choices I was making in life. I don't think I'm unique in that. I think that there are a lot of people in America who are suffering through that. So there are about 115 people a week in the state of Massachusetts alone who are having a notice of intent to foreclose recorded on their property. And 75% of those people can stay in their home. There's no question about it. If they just craft an outstanding application for assistance, do an effective job explaining their hardship situation, they can retain that home with a little assistance from the very entity that is threatening to take it away, which is what we find so challenging to believe. You know, the very entity that won't stop calling you and has been sending you mail for 9 months and pestering you is the actual entity that can help you. And so I try to be the conduit to help people understand that and put that into effect.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. It does make sense though, because a lot of these banks, they actually don't want to foreclose. They don't want to have to deal with this property. And if they can find some common ground somewhere, they'll likely take the path of least resistance, I would think.
No question about it. That's an inalienable truth nationwide. There isn't a single bank or servicer in America who wants to foreclose. There isn't a single homeowner that wants to be foreclosed on. They do not want to own that asset. Asset represents collateral, and that's all it represents to the bank. They will foreclose if you do nothing, of course, but they do not want to. You know, they are in great fear of, when people stop paying their mortgage, these banks have, come to expect that the property will fall into disrepair, may very well become abandoned, it may be filled with squatters, and the value of their very collateral will lessen as time goes on. And so they prefer a proactive debtor to come forward and say, hey, listen, I understand I've fallen out of your good graces. I'd like to do my level best to get back into your good graces. Please help me understand your assistance application process. And if it's a Freddie or Fannie or Ginnie or any government backed loan, they give you so many bites at the apple at this stuff when you're talking about assistance options. And one of the very best ones that are out there for all these government backed programs, it's called different things for different banks, but it's essentially a partial claim mortgage where HUD gets involved. And so HUD will come in and they will pay off the arrearage. So if you have 50, 80, $90,000 in arrearage and you have a government backed loan, there's a very good chance that your servicer will work with HUD. HUD will pay off your arrearage in full, record a second mortgage on the property, really a silent second at 0% with no payments due until one of three events: the maturity of the original note, you refinance, or you sell. Of course, at that point, you would be responsible for paying it back, but it essentially takes your arrearage, your past due amount, that amount that's in the top right hand corner of the mortgage statement that feels so overwhelming to everyone who keeps getting it as they miss payment after payment. They'll pay all that off and essentially hold it off in the future for you while keeping your original note and the terms intact. So if you have one of those 2 or 3% mortgages, that is a phenomenal program that so many people are unaware of. And there's nothing better. I guess I just kind of figured out that this was pretty simple stuff for me. In the course of turning my life around over 10 years, you change as a human being. And I certainly did. Part of the deal I made with the people that helped me turn my life around was to just give what I've learned freely to the next man or woman. And so that just happens to coincide pretty well with my useless knowledge of real estate and how simple it is to create applications and hardship letters and letters of explanation, the kind of things that the average homeowner doesn't really understand. There are some people who come into my office, they'll sit down in 25 minutes with a phone call on the bank, and they are approved for a partial claim mortgage, and they're back in the good graces with the bank. That doesn't deserve a fee, in my opinion, that. And I tell people all this time, continuing to do this work actually helps me continue to heal from the damages I did in my life and the people around me who love me and that I love. It's pretty amazing to be able to do that with someone. I've been a real estate investor for a long time, but I'm not looking to buy your house if you're behind on your mortgage. I own a real estate company. So absolutely, if we exhaust every single solitary option, I'll help you sell it. But I'm a proponent I'm a fan of maximizing return on the asset. And I'm honest, I'm certainly not going to maximize your return. I'll pay you less than what we could get on the open market. And so I know there's a million different people out there, and half of them are my friends. I understand the wholesale business and all that kind of thing. With this particular arena of people, I'm not looking to capitalize on what I perceive to be their misfortune. It's just not my bag.
You mentioned in your state, 75% of those that are in pre-foreclosure can be saved. What's the percentage of people actually taking any kind of action in order to do it? Every time I've run into pre-foreclosure situations, their head is in the sand until the very last minute. And unfortunately, I'm not in the position to help them at that point.
Yeah. I would say that 50% of the people do something about it in general terms, and we want it to be 100%, and we aggressively pursue every single one of them. And there's different kinds of people at different places in their life. The one truth that I've realized is that if you are in threat of imminent foreclosure, it is tremendously likely that you have far larger problems in your life that make the foreclosure feel like a small. And it's a lot of work trying to get people to compartmentalize problem for problem. And what I do know is that if you can save your home and remain a homeowner and stay in a great termed mortgage, if you can do that and get things together enough, long enough to do that, the other problems in your life will improve. If you don't do that, they will get worse. And it's relatable. The one thing you can't fake is shared struggle. I'm not special. I'm not different. I know what struggle is. I understand it. I have empathy for it, but I also know how to turn it around. I also know how to make the changes in your life necessary in order to not struggle anymore. Struggle's supposed to be a chapter. We are usually guilty ourselves of making it the whole story. I think that my story resonates with people who are facing similar struggle. And I have a great understanding for it. I don't judge it. I've heard stories that'll spin your head, as you can imagine. I would say that a lesser percentage of people, in my opinion, I'm super honest and raw, and I'll tell you how it is, are actually victims. A lot of people think they're a victim and they're not. The reality of the situation, health, death, those kinds of things that are outside of someone's purview of control. Okay, victim, true hardship. But I would say the majority of people bear some responsibility, whether or not they're willing to acknowledge it in where they are. And that's just who I am. I speak to people with truth and honesty, and I'll share my story all the time. I possess no judgment, but most people out there who are behind on their mortgage can save their home and keep it at an affordable rate with just a little bit of proactive action.
Just to remind everybody, hopeforhardship.org, hopeforhardship.org. You can learn a little bit more there. If you found some value in what we're talking about so far, do us a quick favor, share this with one of your investor friends. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a quick like and subscribe.
Absolutely.
So, could you kind of break a few things down regarding maybe some misconceptions around the foreclosure process for people who, you know, I think when you start to get these type of notices, maybe they start to think that all hope is lost and there isn't any avenues here.
Sure. So, okay, in the state of Massachusetts, anyway, about 23 states in the country are similar to Massachusetts. And what I think it was the first George Bush, I think during the original Iraq War, he created the Soldier and Sailors Act, the Service Members Act, where every lender in America is required to provide notice on the Soldier and Sailors Act. And really that notice, it's typically delivered to somebody by a constable, and they will come to you, in a relatively unceremonious manner, knock on your door and embarrass the hell out of you and hand you this form while your mother-in-law is in the kitchen or something. That's usually how it goes. And all that notice says is your lender has served you this notice of intent to foreclose. You have until the following date to come to the land court and tell us if you're in the military. And what everyone thinks is that means they have to go to court. And I explain to people all the time, you don't have to go to court unless you're in the military. That is about 45 days in the future from the moment you are served that letter. That court date is typically 45 days in the future. And all that means is if you're in the military, show up, prove that you're in the military, and they will stop the action and work with you further than they would if you're not in the military. If you're not in the military, there's no need to go to court. It's not a true court date for you. The reality is that the lender cannot move forward in the next step of the foreclosure process until that date has passed. And that is when you have the most flexibility with the lender, is during that 45-day period. Really, a lot of the work that we do is timeline manipulation, right? If you are facing foreclosure and you have effective dialogue going on with your lender, it gives you the opportunity to almost manipulate the timeline and how much time you have to begin taking action on this problem. I think the biggest struggle that we face is, like you said, a lot of people bury their head in the sand, and I was certainly guilty of that myself. I tell people all the time, I probably had 2 years of unopened mail sitting on my dining table. In hindsight, the solutions to all my problems were about 19 months ago in that pile of mail. And we just, people, when they're facing that kind of struggle, they don't open their mail. And part of the problem that we face that exacerbates this is that 600 people start chasing you when they see that notice. A very small percentage of them have any real true intent in helping you retain your home. Certainly, I don't know anyone that's trying to do it for free, that's for sure. But there are attorneys, investors, realtors, everyone under the sun reaches out to these people and trying to capitalize on what they perceive to be the misfortune of somebody else, either trying to buy the property for cheap and doing these things. And look, a lot of these people are salespeople, and they do a great job getting the people to believe some portion of a story about these are your options, this, that, and the other thing. And so, yeah, I'm fighting against that tide all the time. There's an attorney here in Massachusetts who sends out a letter every time this happens that says he'll sue your bank. Give him, not on a contingency fee basis, give him $5,000 and he'll sue your bank. I have people that have done that. I've yet to see a successful suit that stopped the foreclosure and ended up in some windfall. And so there's just so much information coming at you when these things come. And so I understand why people get nervous and most of all distrusting. But the reality is, in Massachusetts, if you don't do anything from the day that notice of intent is recorded and you get served, you don't do anything, you are about 120 days away from an auction. If you open up dialogue and start creating assistance applications, and here's how it works with the assistance application in every bank. Our sole mission is to get an application to what we call certified complete. Once the lender or the servicer deems the application certified complete, it goes under review. Review takes about 30 days, and review is like reverse underwriting. Like when you bought the house, you went to underwriting, and then when you need assistance, it also goes to underwriting. And so the struggle is getting it to certified complete. There isn't a bank on the planet who deems an application complete when you first submit it. They require additional supporting documentation. If you have a deposit in your checking account for more than $500, they need a letter of explanation for each one. And they need letters of explanation for anything that comes up that you can't explain with supporting documentation. So there's all sorts of supporting documentation that goes on in this process. Once we get it all complete, we follow up with the bank every 3 business days, because that's where most people end up suffering. Is they put together an application, they send it off to the bank and they think they're all set. And the next thing you know, there's an auction scheduled. This is about constant follow up with the servicer or the lender every 3 business days. I'm just calling looking for a status update, because it's not the bank's job to chase the consumer in this situation. It's the consumer's job to chase the bank. And so we create great applications. We explain their hardship effectively. We gather all the supporting documentation with their assistance. And this is kind of timeline manipulation. This is moving it along. You're actively communicating with the bank. They know that you have an assistance application. Oh, it's certified complete. Once that happens, they have 30 days to review it and issue what's called a results letter. And that results letter can be, one of 3 things. You qualify for nothing, which is rare. You qualify for retention assistance options. Here's what they are. And then sometimes it'll say We will assist you, but they are non-retention options. And non-retention, of course, means that you have to move on from the property. Those two options are fewer and further between in this market because they're really only a short sale or a deed in lieu, which yet to meet someone who would do that. A lot less short sales nowadays with this ridiculous 43% appreciation in real estate values over the last 5 years. For the first time in my career and maybe ever, and I don't recommend this, but you can probably go 2, 3 years not paying your mortgage and still sell your house and get it back, which has never happened in the history of real estate. Usually, when you don't pay your mortgage for a couple of years, you're underwater. But because appreciation has gone through the roof, we're doing that with people all the time. They haven't paid their mortgage in 2 years. They put their house on the market and sell it and get $196,000. Unheard of. So it's timeline manipulation, right? Let's get in, communicate with your bank, and let's buy you some time by effectively communicating, checking all of their boxes and staying within their time frame. And that really, it gives the consumer control back. The hardest thing that I had to realize when I got foreclosed on is at some stage I had to come to the really humbling realization that I have to leave my home. That was the hardest thing I did. And that stands true as the hardest thing I've witnessed anyone go through in this process. If you get to that point where you recognize I'm going to have to leave this home, the most important thing becomes I'd like to leave it on my terms in my time frame. And that's why any single option prior to foreclosure is a better option than foreclosure. I represented Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae for a long time in my career as a seller's agent. And I witnessed probably 200 lockouts. The sheriff shows up to a house with a box truck, 2 movers, knock on the door. How you guys are leaving today? Anything you want that can fit in that truck, we'll pay for storage for 30 days. But when we're finished here, we're changing the locks and you're on the curb. What's worse than that? Besides a health problem, that might be the worst possible thing that can happen to a household. I do everything in my power to make sure people don't get to that place. Being foreclosed on is tremendously challenging. It makes you unbankable, as I described before with me. It's a public event on your credit. It lasts a long time, makes it harder to negotiate a tenancy relationship with a landlord when you have to go find replacement housing. You get no money when you get foreclosed on, and your credit goes in the tank. And you lose all control. And that's really the rub here, man, is the uncertainty is what kills people. The not knowing. The uncertainty is what really wreaks havoc with people through this process. And so by communicating with the bank and keeping the lines of communication open and meeting the deadlines of their timelines, you can expand the timeline, gain a little bit more certainty in your mind and a little bit of comfort. And so that's what we do.
Well, could you give me an idea as to the people that you help? How many of them stay with it and they don't fall back into some?
Sure. I'd say 80%, about 80% right now, but 20% of the people like clockwork, you can depend on. Yeah. It's tough. They, they fail to recognize the value proposition of what was really just gifted to them by the bank, not ready to make true changes in life. You get a bailout, which is really what this is. It's a bailout. But your life continues on the path that it was. We're going through that right now. We have someone that got a great setup, that partial claim that we talked about. They took the arrears, they put it on the back end. I had great hopes for it. And then, because the fair bargain with the bank is, okay, we will pay off, we'll get HUD to pay off this arrearage. You resume your normal payments within 60 days, and they give you the partial claim document. It's essentially, it's a new mortgage. Get that signed, notarized, overnight it back to the bank. And then depending on when in the month that happens, you're like 45 days away from your first payment. If it happened right now, your first payment would probably be May 1st. So we just did that with somebody, and it's been 7 months and they never made one payment again.
Hmm.
So it happens, and it's those kind of things end up being above our pay grade. It's You don't have control over that kind of thing. But we stay in touch. We give reminders every month for an extended period of time. Hey, the payment's due. You know, once this happens, your portal kind of goes to hell, your online payment portal, and your statements don't really make sense. And so you have to call in your payment on the first. Do not send a check. Call in your payment until your portal's legit and you can go back in and set up auto pay and all the numbers jive. There's a 3-month arbitrage with the bank before they get things figured out. But yeah, about 20% of the people we lose to attrition.
Well, how does your team, with all of the follow-up and everybody you're likely helping in this, how
Sure.
there is something you're gonna have to you gotta still cover your nut.
Well,
How are you
so
paying for this?
I own a real estate company, right? I still own a real estate company, and we work in every different way you could work in real estate. I own some investment properties, and we self fund, myself and my two co founders. We self fund this stuff. We have a staff, and it's just kind of become part of our bread. I started doing this stuff. But you start doing good things, you start paying it forward, and people start paying attention, and people want to get involved. And that's really what's happened. I spend the vast majority of my time doing this stuff. I'm sitting here in my home office today. I've been on the phone all morning and just kind of keeping people in the game. A lot of this becomes a function of emotional support and encouragement, talking people out of their own way, because that's what we become. We get in our own way, we get in our own head. But yeah, the successes are across the board, and I could tell you something, the true paying it forward, like the true definition, right, is if you help someone save their home in the future, when it comes time for them to sell it, I'm their guy. There's no question about that. Without even having to ask, that's paying it forward. I did a lot of short sales, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I did a ton, 1,000 short sales. So we sold 1,200 Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae properties. And so dealing with banks and the paperwork and doing it's just always been so simple to me. An assistance application is very similar to an application for a short sale. It's that useless knowledge that I never really knew what I would do with my whole life, but it's just turned out to be the deal. There's great reward in protecting home ownership and helping families get out of their own way, get their orders and their affairs back in order, and keep that low interest mortgage. It's phenomenal. You and I probably won't see a rate like that again in our lives.
Mhm.
The value of it is tremendous. I have some apartments that are 600 square feet, 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartments that I rent for 1850. And there are some people in a 4-bedroom home right now paying 1400 on a 2% fixed. That change in housing is a very humbling event. When I went through that, I had to live somewhere I did not want to live. And I remember what that did to me psychologically and how I felt inside. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. There's usually it's simple. It's arduous. Look, we're talking to banks. You talk to a guy in Houston one day in a cubicle, and then you talk to somebody in, India the next day, and you're all over the place. And it can be frustrating. And you send in documentation and, oh no, we haven't received it. Well, I sent it to this email address. Oh, yep. No, that's our email address. You send it again, call for the status up. That right there is why people fail at this. Now, if you are facing this issue, the ability to laser focus and compartmentalize on this singular issue when you have other problems and uncertainty swirling around in your life is minimal at best. You just don't have it. And I can't even call Comcast, Xfinity about my own damn DVR. I'll get pissed off because it's mine. The emotional barrier that we provide people is I'm not angry at the bank. I don't carry the history of the homeowner themselves, and I don't carry the feelings and the resentments and the blame and the things that you yourself, if you're the one that is fighting with a creditor, face. It's simplified when it's not my bank and my issue. I don't carry the same emotions. And so if anything, that's the greatest value that we provide is, look, we know how to do this. This is simple to us, because look, when you're talking to a bank, the last thing in the world you want to be is irritable, discontent, rude, impatient. Those things don't fly, more like charming, complimentary, understanding, and helpful. And so, because it's not my mortgage, I don't carry all those emotions. So it's a lot simpler for me.
Well, do you have a particular service area? You mentioned Massachusetts a few times here.
Yeah. So, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Florida is where we do it right now.
Okay. What could you share one of the stories of somebody you helped?
Yeah, sure. So, this woman that I've been working with for quite some time now, she lives in the Boston metro area. We went back and forth for 6 months. This bank always needed something more, and she just couldn't stand it. It's just part of the deal. And so it took 6 months to get it under review. And we finally did that. Part of the problem is she's self-employed, so they require a P&L and supporting bank statements and all the rest of that. And so it makes it somewhat more complicated, and they need them constantly updated each month. They did not approve her for a partial claim or a modification of any sort. They did not offer her any retention assistance. They offered her non-retention assistance. Now, she's 66 years old. And so I connected her with a lender that I trust to look into a reverse mortgage. Now, the reason that she was going to be possible to do a reverse mortgage was because she was not on title and not on the mortgage. Her husband had passed away and he owned the property himself, and he was the sole guarantor on the note. And so, because her credit wasn't being really affected by this delinquent payment of 9 months or so, she was a candidate for this reverse mortgage. And so we entered into that fray, and she needed some probate work done as well. And so I connected her with my attorney and the lender that I trust for these reverse mortgages. Unfortunately, she doesn't qualify because of her equity position. I thought she would, but she only owes about 200,000. The resale value is probably 700. The appraised value might come in at 750. But the way that these reverse mortgages do this algorithm that none of us understand is they base the equity need on 100-year lifespan. And so they 34 years of taxes, insurance, and they tack that on and see if she fits in the diagram. And she was, $10,000 short or something like that. So then I just kind of helped her talk about her next option. She's not ready to sell. She will sell, but she's not ready. She wants to buy a home with her daughter, with an in-law. It'll be her daughter's first home. And the equity in her property will help them buy a great property for her and her daughter. They're just not quite there. She needs a year or so. And so I ordered two figures. I ordered the payoff and I ordered the reinstatement amount. And the reinstatement amount was about $35,000. And I spent a couple days kind of talking through her about, I said, look, if you can find the money, if you can find this $35,000, you can absolutely guarantee it will be paid back. And I can have my attorney help you record a second mortgage in the name of this person, do a 1 year, do a 2 year with a balloon payment, some reasonable interest rate, and give them the security they need to know that you're in a strong equity position and you will be able to move on from this property and get them paid in full. And so that was a very emotional look. None of us want to go to the well in our family. And so, but the reality is, if you can guarantee that the money will be paid back and it buys you a little bit of a time frame and everything's cool, then it's copacetic. And so I kind of helped her engage with her family. And mom is going to right now, today, the wire just went through for the reinstatement, $35,000. She'll be back in the good graces. She retains that rate. And then in about a year, when things are right, we'll sell the property, find them something for her mom. But it took, the better part of 8 months from the beginning to the end to get through this. And so every situation is different. Not everyone qualifies for assistance. If your income doesn't jive, the bank doesn't think you're a viable bet, then they will come back to you and say you don't have any assistance options available, but are always free to pay the reinstatement amount. And sometimes that's what has to happen. I like to avoid it, of course, at all costs. I like people to keep money in their pocket. I have other people who we've exhausted every option, I guess. And that's kind of the point here, right? Is we come in and exhaust every single option for them to retain their property without any money out of pocket. We exhaust every single option and bring them to a place where, okay, they can reasonably understand their choices and believe that they have truly given a fair effort on every single other option. And some of them end up that way, you know. Some of them are just the best stories in the world, man. I made some really good friends doing this work, people I never would have met otherwise in my life that have become friends of mine. I meet a lot of people who cannot see the forest through the trees. I met his name's Jimmy, you know, and he became a really good friend of mine. I went to his house and his wife, his beautiful daughter was there, and they wanted help so bad, but Jimmy was very untrusting. And he couldn't really see in this home that he was sitting in how badly it was falling apart, how badly his wife and his daughter really wanted to get the hell out of there. And we ended up doing that. You know, we ended up moving on from that property. That ended up being a short sale. And then I found them a rental. I didn't charge them anything to find the rental or to buy the next house. And this is one of the best success stories. We ended up selling the property short. They hadn't paid their mortgage since 2009. And this was in 2022. It was a toxic asset and it was worth $100,000 less than what was owned. So we eventually got that short sale done, negotiated a lease with a rental in the same town, beautiful little ranch. The way we got it is I proposed a 3-year lease and the landlord liked that. So they signed a 3-year lease. Then it just terminated not long ago. You know, he and I had become fast friends. And I said, hey, let's talk to your landlord. I bet you guys can get approved for a loan now. Let's see if you can buy it. And so we went to the landlord and said, hey, if you put this thing on the market, you're going to pay a commission, sell it direct to him. There's no fee. It's a private sale. Boom, done. They got approved for $350,000 mortgage. They bought this house. They already got like 60,000 in equity. They have completely turned their lives around from where they were the day I met them. I've become fast friends with the entire family. And I made precisely $0 in any of that stuff. I just wanted to help these guys move on from the shitty situation they were in.
Sure. Based on what you're saying, it sounds like you got something far more than anything money could buy.
Well,
With that being said, you know, earlier you mentioned you went through some tough times yourself and you had to go and kind of find your North Star. I've run into a number of people, and I'm going to say, including myself, you have these turbulent times. Your compass is completely out of whack. You don't even trust yourself. Was there anything you did or what happened to finally find your North Star and you figured things out again?
yeah. So listen, a big part of my path is sobriety, right? I got sober. I wasn't sober for a long time. I kind of lived life in the moment, you know, for a long time, 20 years. And so, yeah, I changed significantly once I did that. You know, I lived a life I could really best describe was my false self, you know, and the energy that I put into pretending I was someone that I really wasn't was, you know, ad nauseum. It was a full time job, just trying to be what I convinced myself the world thought I should be. I'm living a much different path as my true self now, which is just a guy who all I ever wanted to be was rich, man. Since I was a little kid, I blame it on lifestyles of the rich and famous. You know, what's his name? Robin Leach. I mean, he ruined
Mhm.
me as a kid. You know, when I was seeing these princes and stuff living in these thousand room homes, you know, in Brunei or something. And I was like, man, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And I was just really always, my motivating thing in life was money, 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 more of it. There's never enough. And then you know, through my journey, I figured out that the amount of money that'll make me feel okay inside is $5 more than I'll ever have because it was never the answer, you know. So I tried to fill that hole inside of me with a whole bunch of things and it never worked. Just never worked because I was trying to fill it with the wrong stuff. Yeah, man, I turned my life around quite a bit. I'm a very different person than I was during my lovely days of drinking and excess. And that's just part of the deal, man. You know, you just pay it forward. What matters, my definition of happiness and success, totally different today than ever was. And those societal norms and pressures that social media has exacerbated so much in this country, you know, that women are less than unless they're beautiful and men are less than unless they're wealthy. You know, that's just a bullshit story that I just don't believe anymore. But boy, I sure did I sure did believe it for a long time. So I understand it. I understand the trappings of it. I don't judge it. I'm just really grateful to not be tied up in it anymore. I like waking up being happy. I don't look for external validation, those kinds of things. I just like to be good to the people around me, be great to my wife, my stepkids, and my family, and the people in my circle. And it makes me feel pretty complete every day if I can help someone avoid the pain and the strife that I went through when I made really poor decisions after I had made really poor decisions. And those decisions were to take the easy way out. I let properties get foreclosed on. I filed corporate and personal bankruptcy. And those three choices in my life, in hindsight, I did not have to make any of those choices. I just simply wasn't, not that there was really anyone around that could have done the kind of stuff that I do right now, but I wasn't in any condition to receive any guidance regardless. And so it's just, it's fun. I enjoy it. I think it's an outstanding thing to enter someone's lifeline and become a positive inflection point that can create positive trajectory from that point on. That is fulfilling.
Yeah, I can only imagine. One more time, hopeforhardship.org, hopeforhardship.org. You can learn a little bit more there. But Mike, before we jump into the rapid fire questions and close out this episode, is there anything we should have tried to touch on here?
No, man, it's good.
Okay. Well, the first one is, what lie do real estate investors often tell themselves?
It's about the top line number.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Buy more real estate.
Do you have a book recommendation?
My favorite book is Whale Hunt in the Desert.
Okay, that's a new one. So I'll have
Yeah.
to check that one out. And then finally, what single strategy or tool have you implemented that has had the biggest time-saving impact to you or your business?
A CRM.
Okay.
CRM. As much as I hate them, they are a necessary evil. Yes.
Yeah, that's true. Again, it is hopeforhardship.org. I'll make sure that I have that as a clickable link in the show notes, but it was great to meet you, Mike. I really appreciate the value you brought today.
Thank you very much. Great to meet you, man.